Good try. Oh, can you hear me? Yes. Is it working? Yes. Well, I thank you, John. It's nice to be back here. As I was telling John, I've only been a resident of Vermont for 5 years, came 5 years ago, and very shortly thereafter I got an invitation to speak up here in St. Albans, and I didn't know a thing about it, didn't know a thing about Vermont. Wonderful crowd. I liked it so much that I've been back a number of times since then. One thing I learned on that trip is I was trying to find out how to learn more about Vermont, and somebody in this group talked to me about the 251 Club, which I joined and immediately went to see all 251 Vermont towns. What a wonderful experience, but I've got to thank the group here for getting me interested in doing that, so I have that to thank you for. The talk today is a little bit different. I give a lot of talks. I think this is around the 1,000th talk that I've given, most of them on spices. When I was working at McCormick, it would be for customers or conventions about the history of spices or spices. The last number of years in retirement or semi-retirement, I've done more on the bird watching side. So a group here that's from a college sort of a background, I hesitate to even offer the Jewels of Ecuador because it was originally put together for bird watchers, for Audubon societies. But the birds are so wonderful, and if you've seen hummingbirds, do you have hummingbirds around your house sometimes? This summer, for the first time, I put up a hummingbird feeder on our camp down in Charlotte on the lake, and we've had hummingbirds around there all summer. They are spectacular. They are such interesting birds that I wanted to try to share with you my enthusiasm for this group of birds. But in terms of a talk for a group of knowledgeable people, besides just the birds, which I think you'll find interesting, there are two other things that I do want to talk about. One is ecotourism, because that's really taken off in Ecuador, and it's made a major difference in the lives of the people there and their ability to protect the environment, which they need to do in order to keep these birds around for people to see. The other thing is going to be toward the end. I'm going to talk about a man named John Gould. You probably never heard of John Gould. And I must admit, I heard of him only indirectly because, like John James Audubon, who did Birds of America, John Gould did Birds of the Himalayas, and Birds of England, and Birds of Australia. 150 years ago, he was the person in identifying and illustrating birds of the world. So a little bit about him at the end. So we're going to get talking about the Jewels of Ecuador. They are, of course, the hummingbirds. There are in the world about 330 different species of hummingbirds. They are found just in the Western Hemisphere. There are none in Asia. There are none in Africa. It's an American group of birds. We have about 15 species that breed in the United States, only one east of the Mississippi, the ruby-throated hummingbird. You've heard of that. So we're going to talk about one of the 132 hummingbirds that are in the small little country of Ecuador, and that's where I went on this trip. This is one called the crowned wood nymph. It happens to be a wide-ranging hummingbird. You can see this bird in Mexico. You can see it as far south as Brazil, but I just love those green little flecks. It reminds me of jewels so much. We have to see how to get this going. There we go. Talk about Ecuador. Ecuador is a very small country. Ecuador is about the size of New England. It's about the size of the state of Nevada. It's one of the smaller countries in South America, but it has more bird species in the country than all except one other country in the world. It has 1,800 different species of birds found in the border there. It's named Ecuador because it's right on the equator. Have some of you folks been to Ecuador? One thing about Ecuador that's well known is the fact that it's the owner of the Galapagos Islands. The Galapagos are part of Ecuador. And if any of you have been to the Galapagos, I'm sure you flew into Guayaquil or to Quito. Ecuador, a fascinating country because from a bird watcher, there's so many birds there. Why are there so many birds? I'll give you a little description of why there's so many birds in Ecuador. This is the country. Down the middle of the country are the Andes Mountains. They go up to 20,000 feet. The town of Quito is 9,000-foot elevation, so you got these very high mountains down the center of the country. On the west, on the Pacific slope, you have what we call the lowlands. In the north, the lowlands are very, very high rainfall. They're called wet lowlands or jungle. It's part of a group of area called the Choco that has a lot of birds found nowhere else in the world. In the southern part of the Pacific slope, it gets drier. It's almost a desert, so you have birds like Arizona birds, very dry country birds. Then you go up in the mountains, you have different birds, and then on the east slope, you have the Amazon jungle. So you have all these diverse habitats. You have the Pacific slope, the lowlands, the middle elevations, the higher elevations, different birds in different groups. It's just a fantastic area for bird watchers because you can see so many birds there. When I go traveling for bird watching now, I go with my brother. You'll see him in a minute. My brother is the #1 ranked U.S. bird watcher for his world list. In the next month or two, he's going to get to 9,000 species for his world list. He'll be the first American ever to get to that level. So when we go bird watching, we do what's called target bird watching. You can have bird watchers in 3 different categories. You can have bird watchers like my wife, that if the bird is big enough, like an eagle sitting on the tree, or a flamingo standing out in the bay in Florida, she gets a little bit excited for a little bit of period of time. That's the first bird watcher. Then there's another widespread group of bird watchers, maybe 80 million in the United States, that feed birds in their backyard. They can tell a cardinal from a blue jay, okay? Things like that. And then you have the serious bird watcher. My brother and I are in the serious lister category. This is a different category than you'll bump into most of the time with people in Vermont. Target birding in Ecuador is very fascinating. 1,800 species. My brother and I had seen all but about 200 of those. We'd already seen 1,600 of the birds in the country of Ecuador, so we wanted to be target birding. We wanted to go back to see the birds that we had missed on previous trips. Target bird watching is slope specific because the Pacific slope has different birds than the Amazon slope. Because they can't interbreed, you've got the Andes Mountains running down the middle. They can't interbreed, so they become different species. They're elevation specific. They're birds that are found in the lowlands. In Vermont, we have the Champlain Valley. They're birds in the Champlain Valley. And then they're birds on the top of Mount Mansfield. Different species entirely. Elevational change of 4,000 feet, right? From sea level, or Lake Champlain level, 100 feet. To the top of Mount Mansfield, about 4,000 feet. In Ecuador, you've got a 20,000-foot altitudinal differential, so you can imagine the different birds. And also habitat specific. Some like forest, some like grassland, some like desert. So a lot of different variations there. We put together a list of the birds that we want to see. We put the elevational area, where they're found. We do a list for the east slope, the west slope. This takes a lot of time, but it's a lot of fun. At my age, any stimulation of the brain I think is good. After I prepare for a bird trip and come back, my wife says, wow, you're pretty sharp. You're remembering things much better than usually. You haven't left your wallet in the bedroom for a couple of days, things like that. So I know that this is very helpful, all the information that you have to have if you're a bird watcher. This is my brother Peter. People say, aren't you jealous that he's the #1 ranked U.S. bird watcher? I said, no, it's not jealousy. I taught him everything he knows. He's 8 years younger. There he is on the left. Here we are a number of years later in India. He lived in India for a total of 6 years. He worked for the State Department. So we've had a wonderful life together, traveling around the world. And even though I didn't teach him all that he knows, because he knows much more than I do, he does the eBird and all the stuff on the computer. I don't do any of that stuff. But I did light the spark. I did light the spark those many years ago in Florida when we started bird watching. Now, I arrived in Ecuador a couple days before my brother Peter. My brother Peter was out in the Galapagos Islands. I had been there before, so I passed on that. I was going to meet him in mainland Ecuador, but there were a couple birds that I wanted to see that Peter had seen while he lived in Colombia for a total of 3 years, 20 years ago. So there's some birds that I wanted to see that he didn't care about, so I went a day early. Stayed at the Bellavista Lodge. It's one of many ecotourism lodges. Now you're going to see a lot of pictures of birds and a lot of pictures of me bird watching, but one thing to remember from a conservation point of view, from an economic point of view, that if you provide jobs for the people that live in these areas, they're not going to chop down the rainforest and make a cow pasture if people will come and pay to stay at their lodge, to eat their food, to hire them as a guide to go out and see the birds that are there. So it's a wonderful way of helping conservation. I was there with a man named Jonas Nielson. You'll see a picture of him from the front in a minute. This is from the back. But it shows this wonderful rainforest habitat that's being protected just because it's an area where there are lots of birds. You can fly into Quito and in 2 hours be in this untouched rainforest, this cloud forest with all sorts of wonderful birds. It's just a fantastic experience. From a bird watching point of view, there were some of these birds found in southwestern Colombia, northwestern Ecuador, the Choco area. This is called the Tanager finch. I hadn't seen that before, so that was very, very exciting for me. Another bird that not only did I want to see, but I was really looking forward to was the plate-billed mountain toucan. You've heard of toucans with their long bills. Here's the plate-billed mountain toucan. One thing about the mountain toucan that I found very, very interesting, and I do a lot of homework after I come back from a trip. A number of years ago, I was in Taiwan. I'm not sure I've given a slideshow on Taiwan. It was a fantastic journey. It was a fantastic trip. We saw a bird there that the Chinese called Batsumiao. Batsumiao means 8-colored bird. We saw a bird in Taiwan that had 8 different colors in it. And the name is the 8-colored bird, Batsumiao. I looked at this bird and I started counting colors. And guess how many I came up with? At least 10 different colors. Birds here, we get excited about a cardinal, red and black. We get excited about a blue jay, white, brown, black, or whatever. Maybe a wood duck has lots of colors, but this bird has 10 different colors. Just a spectacular bird. It eats fruit around these lodges where they have fruit out for the birds. These birds come very, very close, so you can see the toucans up very, very close. This was called the Turquoise Jay. Only 2 colors, but still a very spectacular bird. You don't have to be a 10-colored bird to be pretty to watch. These are called grass-green tanagers. And the names of birds, as we get into the hummingbirds, just listen to the names. Grass-green tanager. Does that exactly tell the colors? Well, as I mentioned, I arrived a day or two early. I went out with Jonas Nielson. There he is on the left. He's from Denmark. He's been in Ecuador for about 25 years leading bird tours. He owns the lodge. We're going to end up at that lodge at the end of the talk. He is probably Ecuador's #1 bird watcher. So to pair up with somebody, to have him as my guide, was very, very spectacular. The negative was we were there in the rainy season. We were there in the late winter, our late winter, and it rained almost the whole time. We had rain to put up with. Off we go to see a bird. We wanted to cross the stream. We couldn't cross the stream. The stream was going too high. We're going to see a bird called the long-wattled umbrella bird. And you'll see a picture of that in a minute. It's a big black bird, a crow-sized or raven-sized bird that lives just in this small little habitat in northwestern Ecuador, southwestern Colombia. And off we go. And this is a lousy picture, okay? But from an artistic point of view, this shows the long-wattled umbrella bird. It has a wattle that comes off of its throat that in the breeding season extends down, as you can see, below the length of the bird. You have a bird that's crow-sized that has a wattle that probably goes down 6 feet. And it's used to attract the female. I don't know why a female would like such a wattle. But you can also see the head of the umbrella bird. This was really spectacular. A bird that my brother Peter had seen when he lived in Colombia, where the bird is also found. But for me, this is just a picture of the photograph to show you that wattle a little bit closer. And also that wonderful covering, that headpiece. The umbrella bird gets its name from that black umbrella that it has over its head. So a spectacular bird. When I see a bird that's really exciting, I do 2 things. I give it a 2 thumbs up, and if I'm close to a creamy stand, I'll go have a creamy afterwards just to celebrate it. And I did that the other day with my friend Keith Woodley, who's from New Zealand, sitting in the back row. We'd seen some shorebirds down at Dead Creek near Addison, and they were really rare, and we got really good views, so we immediately went. Where did we go? The Basin Harbor Club? I forget where we found our creamies. My favorite creamy stand is Goodies in West Addison. You know Goodies? The best creamy for your money in the state of Vermont. Their small is about that big. At any rate, I digress. 2 thumbs up for the umbrella bird. Next place I went, while I'm trying to fill in some time, waiting for Peter, is called Pachacindi. Pachacindi was the first ecotourism lodge to put out hummingbird feeders, which today are so common and attract thousands of bird watchers. My daughter, who's not a bird watcher, and my 6 grandkids went to one of these hummingbird feeders on their way back from the Galapagos last year just because they'd heard about it. I mean, everybody wants to go. So this was the first one. It's a couple German and a guy from California. There's Jonas on the right. The nunneries, they started this, the first one, just spectacular. These lodges have developed into really tourist attractions. especially the Chinese people. Chinese people love to take, well, first of all, Chinese people love to travel now. If you've been to Paris, if you've been to London, if you've been to New York City, there's so many travelers from China. They love, with the big cameras, to get pictures of these hummingbirds. Very, very popular. For each of the locations, there'll be a list of a picture of the hummingbirds that are found there so you can identify them. 40 or 50 species at this one spot. Absolutely incredible. This is the Carnet Hummingbird, just a beautiful, called the buff-tailed Carnet. Hummingbirds have very, very small feet. They don't rely on their feet to do anything except just to perch a little bit on the branch. So the hummingbirds have very small feet. Obviously, their wings are very important. Their wing muscles are very important. The pectoral muscles that make their wing beat are 30% of the muscle weight in the bird. So it's mainly that wing beats can be up to 100 beats. That's 40 or 50, 60, 70, 80, even 100 beats a second. Their heartbeat can be 20 beats a second. These are really high-energy birds. They're beautiful birds. This is the buff-tailed Carnet. As I mentioned in this picture, you can see the buff tail. I'm going to go a little bit faster through some of these. This is called the fawn-breasted brilliant. This is called the green-crowned brilliant, very closely related. The white-necked Jacobin. This is a hummingbird you can see in southern Mexico, all the way down through South America. One of my favorite ones, this is called the violet-tailed sylph. This is on the Pacific side. When we get to the Atlantic side, the Amazon side, you'll see another bird very closely related called the long-tailed sylph. But this is the violet-tailed sylph, the violet-bellied hummingbird, the gorgeted sun angel. This is called the purple-bibbed whitetip. See, it's got a purple bib, and you say, where's the white tip? Well, there it is on that picture. I don't like pictures with bird feeders, but I had to get the white tip on that hummingbird. Roofless-tailed hummingbird. I'm going to go pretty quickly through these because there are just too many hummingbirds there. But it's the names, the brown violet ear. What a great name for this bird, the brown violet ear. And then one of my favorite birds, this is the booted racket-tail. Now, one thing I want you to remember, you've seen the racket-tailed hummingbird. See that long racket tail? And what color are its boots? You have to remember that. Okay, remember Vermont snow. Okay, it has white boots. This is on the Pacific slope. It has white boots. Look at those tiny little feet. Look at those tiny little feet. Just wonderful, the booted racket-tail. Some other birds that we saw that day, golden-headed quetzal. You've heard of quetzals. That was off in the distance. Tanagers are another group of birds in the tropics. We have the Scarlet Tanager here. Some of you may have seen the Scarlet Tanager. Very, very bright bird. Actually, they found recently that it's actually not a tanager. It's closely related to the cardinal and the finches, but that's another story. This is the golden tanager. But again, by feeding them, you can have these tanagers come right to the porch of these ecotourism lodges. So really fantastic. But the bird that was really exciting for me, there's nothing more exciting for me to see a bird that my brother Peter hasn't seen. My brother Peter lived in Colombia for 3 years. He's made 6 or 8 trips to Ecuador. He's seen all but just a few of the Ecuador birds. The white-fronted nunbird he had never seen. So we found that. I was very, very excited. A very, very rare bird. A pretty widespread bird in terms of range, but it's difficult to see. So difficult that my brother Peter hadn't seen it, so I put that in my list and celebrated that. These are another group of birds. These are called Toucan Barbets. Just a beautiful group of birds. And when I started counting the colors on this guy, I also got to 10. So this Chinese bird, the Batsiniao, with 8 colors, here too that I'd seen just within a day of each other with 10 different colors. Just spectacular birds. And then the night that Peter arrived at the lodge, the crested owl was a new bird for me. So now Peter's arrived. Here's Peter on the left. We're here to see a bird called the rufous-crowned antpitta. Very rare bird. Only recently has it been able to be seen by bird watchers at all. Rare, difficult to see, very flighty. But the fellow on the right has trained a local fellow to take bugs up into the mountains and get the antpitta to come right into him so you can see it. So my brother Peter is going, yippee, this is great. I'm going to see this very, very rare bird. So up the trail we go. We hiked for about an hour and a half up to the mountain to the place where the guide was. The guide says, stay here. I'm going to go off and see if I can find the bird. And we waited, and we waited. About 45 minutes later, he comes back and he says, if you know Spanish, malas noticias. Malas noticias means bad news. The bird isn't coming in. So we hike back down the hill. My brother Peter is devastated. It's a bird that I've never seen, but I'm not as worried about each individual bird as he is. We get about halfway down the trail, and the guy says, there's one more place that I've seen this bird. He says, stay here a couple minutes. He goes away for 10 minutes, and he comes back with the two words that Peter wants to hear. Buenas noticias. Good news. So off we go, and he sits down, and here this bird comes right in. And bringing these rare birds in that bird watchers previously were unable to see, and to have them come right in close like that is really what makes ecotourism tick. The white-tailed trogon we just saw on the way down. We get back to the main lodge where we were, the farm where we were. It was actually a fruit farm. We were just hanging around there. We've had great success. The ant pitta that we wanted to see, we've seen. We're going to look for some other birds. Another bird that's really on the top of both of our list, a bird that neither one of us has seen, is called the white-tip sicklebill. The sicklebill is a hummingbird with a long bill that feeds on these flowers called heliconia flowers. And the heliconia flower is a very interesting flower, mainly an ornamental, and this hummingbird species is found only on this kind of flower. So rare that Peter and I had never seen the sickle. So we looked for it, but we didn't see it. But there were lots of fruit there. I love to eat fruit. When my brother lived in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and I had business in Indonesia, buying spices in Sumatra, buying our cinnamon, we would go bird watching together, and we would eat the local fruits. We just love the fruits of Southeast Asia. So we tried the different fruits. The farmer there has a long pole, and he's dislodging a fruit called uvas de montaña, so grapes of the mountain grapes. I'd never seen these before. They're very, very large grapes that grow up in a tree, not on a vine like grapes. They were delicious, you can see from my expression. I was enjoying those. This is cacao. Cacao is one of the major agricultural products that was discovered in the Western Hemisphere. Some of the other ones are chili peppers, which is the most popular spice in the world, if you've heard my spice slideshow. Vanilla, my favorite spice and favorite flavor, which was found by Cortez in Mexico. But the cacao was used by the Aztecs, and they used it as a form of currency, and they also made it into an alcoholic beverage. And they gave Hernan Cortez the alcoholic beverage that mixed vanilla and cacao, which is chocolate, the origin of chocolate together. So cacao, a very, very popular flavor in the world. Most production now comes from West Africa, but it's native to the Americas. A lot of people don't know is that the fruit of the cacao, it's the seed inside that has the chocolate, but the fruit around there that you get for just a couple days a year when the pods are fully mature is a wonderful fruit to eat. Very, very rare to find that. You have to be in the cacao plantation, number one. And number two, you have to be there just a couple days of the year when the pods are fully mature. So we had that. This is the lychee. This is another Asiatic species of fruit that we had when we were in Southeast Asia. The Chinese people loved lychee so much that they had people bring it up from Indonesia, which is where it was native to, into China about 1,500 years ago. So it was very, very popular. As we left there, we made one notation to ourselves, that with all these wonderful fruits, and we'd had the lychees and all these different things, that our favorite fruit in the world they didn't have here. So it was a little disappointing to have your number one favorite fruit, which is native just to Southeast Asia. It's called mangosteen, just a wonderful fruit. So we're going down the road. About a half an hour later, we're going to another bird watching spot, and we pass this little place on the road, and it says Paradero Guayabillas. That means a roadside stop in the town of Guayabillas. It says, venta de frutas exóticas. Get that? Frutas, fruits, exóticas, exotic fruits. We said, whoa, let's go in and see what exotic fruits they have here. It turned out to be a farmer that had gone around the world and had collected these unusual fruits from all over the world. And there were some lychees there, which we had. They were delicious. And then we found the fruit that was our favorite fruit in the world, the mangosteen. In Malaysia, we call it the buah manggis. Buah manggis is the best fruit in the world. And there are food editors that will write articles about this, and they will say, without a doubt, it's the most flavorful fruit in the world. We never see it in the United States. It grows just in Southeast Asia. A wonderful fruit. Mangosteen is the English. It has this wonderful white inside, flavorful, sweet. It is without a doubt the best fruit in the world. I even like this fruit better than a hot fudge sundae or a good creamy. I mean, it's that good. And you can see my brother feels the same way. So after seeing the rare bird and topping it off with the bull mongoose, we were in heaven. Going down the road, the swallow-tailed kite flew over. Here's a bird that's found also in the United States, but this is a spectacular bird. Guayaquil woodpecker. There's another toucan, the chestnut-billed toucan. This is the ivory-billed araceli. A lot of these birds, these are birds that eat fruit. That's why they have those long bills. So here we've just eaten a lot of fruits, and here we're running into birds that are fruit eaters. The plumbeous kite. Sometimes you take a picture and it looks like a pretty picture. So I like this picture just for its view. And then followed by probably one of the ugliest birds. This one is a common bird here in Vermont. You've all seen the buzzard or turkey vulture flying around. This one had the leg of a chicken. If you look, the people there had eaten the chicken and they'd thrown the leg away, and the turkey vulture picks it up, probably taking it back to its babies, but flying by. We're going to visit now with probably the most famous ecotourism bird watcher in the world. This is a man called Angel. Angel's there in the middle. Obviously, I'm on the left, Peter's on the right. Angel started with a farm plot about 25 years ago in Ecuador. And he wasn't sure what to do. He had a bird living on his farm called the cock of the rock. And he thought that the tourists might be interested in the cock of the rock. So he started protecting the forest, not chopping it down, and bringing in foreign tourists to see this incredible bird in the cock of the rock area. In the meantime, in the last 25 years, he's also developed another project to get these ant pittas, the one that we'd gone up the mountain to see a couple days before, and to bring the ant pittas right in where people can see the ant pittas. This is called the mustache ant pitta, and for bird watchers, when Peter lived in Colombia 15 years ago, we would go bird watching in Colombia, and if we heard an ant pitta off in the distance, we were all excited and we wrote it down. We never saw one. Today you can go and you can see 10 or 15 species of ant pitta that are coming to the feeding stations that these people have set up. Just very, very rare birds that are right at your fingertips. This is called the black-backed quail dove. Comes in a little bit closer. Again, birds that bird watchers had never seen. Scaled fruit eater. This is an area called the Amagusa sector, just from a bird watching point of view, very, very important. Lots of endemic birds, the cloud forest, pygmy owl. This one, again, names. This is called the moss-backed tanager. Found just in that northwest Ecuador area. Very, very rare bird. Orange-breasted fruit eater, another bird that obviously eats fruit. Very spectacular. Now, on the way back up the hill, I'm telling my brother Peter about the white-faced nun bird that I'd seen a couple days before, the bird that he had never seen. And I said, Peter, why don't we make a stop at that same place and we'll try to find the nun bird for him. So we go up the road, it's been raining, and now there's a landslide, and the road to where the nun bird is blocked. And you should have seen the look on my brother Peter's face. Here's a chance to find a bird that I'd seen a couple days before that he'd never seen. The road's blocked, we have to turn around and go back down. But as we're going down, I look out of the back seat of the car, and you can't see it in this picture, but right here is a bird. And I'm in the back seat of the car. Peter and Jonas are up in the front seat looking for birds. I said, stop, there's a bird down here. And we looked, and it was another white-faced nun bird. Wow, was my brother happy about that. So we saw that bird. Lots of flowers along the way. When you see all the birds, you stop to spend some time with the flowers. This is an orchid species. Looks very much like the vanilla orchid to me, but it's not that. Just a beautiful flower if you take the time. These are called melostomes. The fruit of the melostome is used by a lot of these birds as a food source. And then we also look at the culture. When you're in an area, if you just go through and you have your eyes just on birds and you don't realize the culture, whether Quito is on the equator and you're going to be right where the equator is, or what the people do with their spare time. This was Easter Sunday. We're stopping at a place to have lunch alongside the road. There's a family there and they're watching something on television. What is it? Is it the Pope blessing the people? I mean, this is a Catholic country, right? So this is Easter Sunday. What are they watching? I was amazed. They were watching a cockfight, which is one of the commonest pastimes in that part of the world. So, again, you never know. Here's Quito. It's in an inter-Andean valley between two mountain ranges, 9,000 foot elevation. Very, very dry. Not much rainfall gets up there on the top. This happens to be a monument to the spot where the equator goes by, just a picture taken out of the car. Again, rainy season, a little bit of rain up there, lots of landslides you have to worry about. We're looking for a park that's up at 14,000 feet. There's a bird up there that I had never seen that we wanted to stop to see on our way over the Andes to get to the Amazon side. Just beautiful tundra sort of habitat above tree line. Wonderful plant species. I'm not a botanist. I don't know the names of them. But there I am looking for the bird. And we found it. It's this bird, this spectacular bird. That and the snipe, which we saw up there. Both of them on the seed snipe, the first one, and then the regular ground snipe. Pretty much walk just on the ground and don't fly very much. They're terrestrial birds. Very difficult to see. Just the high-level forest, agile tip tyrant. Now we're going to get down to the ecotourism and end up with my favorite story of the talk, which is going to be in a few minutes. We stopped at 2 different lodges on the way down the Amazon side. These are completely different birds now than we've seen on the Pacific side because we've gone up over the Andes Mountains. So this is an area called San Isidro. It's been developed as an ecotourism center. Bird watching tours go there. And one of the things they discovered there was this owl. This owl is a species of owl that had been not described before, and it still is unknown. They're afraid to collect a specimen and take it to the museum because this is the only bird that they know. But you go to this place and you can see this owl sitting in the parking lot. This is a green jay, just another pretty bird that's in that area. But this is what the ecotourism lodges look like. They're little cabins. They're very, very nice. You have a main dining room. We were sitting in the dining room here having lunch. And all of a sudden, the water in the water glasses started splashing out of the glasses, and we realized we were in an earthquake. And we ran out of the lodge, and the ground was shaking, and just south of us was a 6.5 earthquake about 30 miles south of where we were. So very interesting effects that you can have. Again, these lodges protect a lot of the forest, which is so important from a conservation point of view. They have the ant pit of bird feeders. The ant pitters come in, butterflies, hummingbirds. I won't bore you with all the hummingbirds. This one is the collared Inca. This is one called the long-tailed sylph. Remember the violet-tailed sylph that we'd seen on the other slope? Had a violet tail. This looks very similar, except it has a much longer tail called the long-tailed sylph. But if you see the same bird, the long-tailed sylph, in a different sunlight, it reflects differently, and it looks like the violet-tailed sylph. This is the long-tailed sylph, but with the sun reflecting to give the tail. Chestnut-breasted cornet. So many hummingbirds. We're on our way to the last lodge now. We're going through some area that is very, very important for the petroleum industry. Somebody came up to me earlier and said they'd been to Ecuador, and some of the area, the Napo area, had been ruined by all the petroleum industry. There's so much petroleum in there that it's leaking out of the cliffs. If you look at this road cut, you'll see some black areas, and if you look closely, it's the petroleum that is just absolutely leaching right out of the ground in front of you. So this is the problem in Ecuador. They have this great resource, petroleum, but you have to make roads and chop down forests to get at it. So it's a great balancing act, but lots of petroleum. There's a bird called the cliff flycatcher that breeds on the cliffs, same color, as you can see, as the cliffs. Look how the natives live. This is how the natives live. Little farmers market with vegetables alongside the road. And then finally, in the last stop, which is the Parque Nacional Sumaco. This is a park that's owned by Jonas Nielson, our guide, and another couple from California. They started this lodge, and it's one of the most popular lodges in Ecuador today. Just wonderful. It's right in the shadows of Sumaco volcano. Lots of birds, lots of habitat that's been protected by the fact that people are coming in and spending money, that the local people can provide food and guide services. These are the couple that owns it, the Olsons. Mrs. Olson is not a bird watcher. This is obviously Mrs. Olson. She gets into making tapestries, and she makes rugs and tapestries as her hobby. There's the toucan in the tapestry. She has a wonderful collection of these tapestries that she sells to people. Wonderful cook there with great food. I found a product that I'd never seen before by my own company, not my own company, the one I work for, McCormick. This is maple syrup. I asked them to pass me the maple, and they didn't understand, and I said, maple, Spanish pronunciation. This is Maple, the way we pronounce it in Spain. But there's maple syrup that I had there that I've never seen in the United States for sale. A wonderful series of trails there that go through this place. Probably 20 miles of trails, past beautiful flowers, interesting insects. This is a centipede. This is probably a millipede because it has 1,000 legs rather than 100 legs. Some of the things. We ran into killer bees. Not the way that I'd run into them years before in Chiapas, Mexico, when I was attacked by killer bees, but that's a story for another day. But these were killer bees that we tried to avoid. Wonderful butterflies. This butterfly had a wing that reminded me of an owl's eye, that yellow eye. And the next night we went out and we found the foothill screech owl that had an eye just like the butterfly. I'm not sure which came first, the butterfly eye or the owl's eye, but they look so much alike, that yellow. We had a bunch of howler monkeys that followed us through the forest. Now, monkeys are pretty smart, and they don't like people below, so you have to watch out when you're in the jungle, or if you're in Africa and you're on the cliff and there are baboons on the cliff, or you're in the jungle and you got howler monkeys, they will get up above you and throw things at you. And we were warned by the guys that don't let them go up ahead, and all of a sudden branches came crashing down around us, dead branches. They were trying to hit us with the branches. It was really pretty exciting. And also bird feeders, the ant pittas were coming into the people that were feeding them, the ants, ochre-breasted ant pitta, birds that years before bird watchers would never been able to see, coming in and sitting there. These were all lifers, new birds for both Peter and myself, the plain-backed ant pitta, spotted nightingale thrush. This happens to be a bird that's found in Vermont. This is a great-cheeked thrush on its wintering grounds in Ecuador. And they breed up in the northeastern United States. Our Bicknell's thrush that you may have heard about up on Mount Mansfield, very closely related to the Bicknell's thrush. Yellow-tufted woodpecker, lineated woodpecker. This bird is called the Annie. Red-billed parrot, just so many birds. Lots of hummingbirds. Mr. Olson, Brother Peter, watching the hummingbirds come in. The golden-tailed sapphire, nice name of the golden tail. Now, I asked you before when we saw the racket-tailed hummingbird to remember the color of the boots. What color were the boots on the Pacific side? White as Vermont snow, okay? What color are they on the Atlantic side? They're chestnut-colored boots. And they think now that they're two different species. They were thought to be just one species, one with white boots, one with chestnut boots. Now they think that they're significantly different and separated by the Andes, that this will be a different species of bird, but right now called the booted racket-tail. In Peru, where Peter and I were a couple months ago, the racket-tailed hummingbird there, the racket-tails intertwine at the end, and now they think that might be a third species of the racket-tail. The white-booted, the chestnut-booted, and the twisted-tailed racket-tail. So just a neat bird. This is one of my favorites, the wire-crested thorntail. Again, the names of birds, wire-crested thorntail, spectacular. And this bird, the last hummingbird, actually the next to last, called the Gould's jewel front, a spectacular hummingbird. And I went back home and afterwards and I said, Gould, I wonder who Mr. Gould was, to have a hummingbird named after him. And I learned about a man named John Gould. Has anybody in the audience heard about John Gould? Have you heard about Charles Darwin and the Darwin finches of the Galapagos? Okay. Mr. Gould was even more important. Mr. Gould was the curator of the Zoological Museum of London from about 1825 to when he died in 1871. He was the curator in London, and as groups of naturalists all over the world brought back bird specimens, dead birds to him, he would make a book about the birds of that area. He has a book with paintings that he's done, like John James Audubon paintings. Matter of fact, here's one of his hummingbird paintings. He did books on birds of the Himalayas, birds of Australia, these wonderful paintings that he and his wife did over a period of time. And when Charles Darwin came back into London, we think if Darwin went to the Galapagos, he saw these different finches on different islands, realized that they were probably from the same ancestor, and that was evolution. No, not at all. He brought back the specimens to the Zoological Society and dropped them on John Gould's desk and said, here are the things I collected in the Galapagos. And John Gould was the one that went through them. Charles Darwin had identified some of the male Darwin's finches because they were black and called them blackbirds. Some of the smaller ones he called wrens. He had no recollection and no notes taken on which island he'd collected the birds. It was a scientific information of hardly any value at all. But John Gould took the specimens and realized, wait a minute, these 4 mockingbirds, on each island they're different, so they're 4 different species. These finches, all 12 of them, they're all different species because of different sizes of the bill. And it was John Gould that gave us the theory of evolution that ended up in Charles Darwin's book, Origin of the Species. And if you read The Origin of the Species, he gives credit to John Gould, a guy that I would have never heard about if I hadn't seen the Gould's jewel front and wondered why it was named John Gould. John Gould was so interested in hummingbirds that he had a collection of dead skins of hummingbirds, 320 different skins. There are only 340 in the world today. He had this giant collection. Toward the end of his life, guess what? He'd never seen a hummingbird in real life. He'd been to Australia, he'd been to Europe, he'd never been to the Americas. Remember, hummingbirds were found just in the Western Hemisphere. So he made a trip to Philadelphia in the spring of, I think, 1870. Saw a hummingbird go by quickly, went down to Washington, and in some gardens there near the Capitol, there were some flowers and lots more hummingbirds. So he finally got to see hummingbirds right at the end of his life. But he was the guy that was really the man for hummingbirds and the man for evolution, if you believe in evolution, and Charles Darwin. Read about the effect of John Gould. Well, we're down to the last bird. The last bird happens to be a hummingbird. Peter and I, as I told you, the heliconia flower, remember the heliconia flower and the sickle-billed hummingbird that feeds on that? Peter and I had never seen it. This is the last hour of the last day. We've just seen the Gould's jewel front. It was a lifer for both of us. We'd like to see one more lifer. So Peter, all of a sudden, up here in the upper left, you can see some heliconia, wild heliconia. Peter looks back through the thicket and he says, I think I've got something. I think I've got something. And we looked in there, and there it was, the white-tipped sickle-bill. Boy, were we happy. So what did we do? 2 thumbs up. And as soon as we found an ice cream stand on the way back into Quito, we stopped and had an ice cream. So a wonderful trip. We learned a lot. We saw so many things. And I hope you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed giving it to you. Any questions? Any questions? Ecuador or Ancasna?
This isn't a question,
yes.
It's a comment. I just have been so impressed at the expressions of these birds' faces.
Oh, that one, yeah, that's a good one.
A lot of them have an attitude.
Yeah, an attitude is right.
Yeah, that's amazing.
If you have a hummingbird feeder, there'll be one species that's dominant, or a male, and you'll see the other ones coming. The one bird will chase them away, and there's just a lot of activity.
We watched 2 of them one evening, obviously in a mating dance that was just, wow.
That's great.
And my son-in-law was sitting there one day in a red shirt.
They love red, don't they? They really do. You know, my new hummingbird feeder has red flowers, and they really like it.
I just love it.
I get such a kick out of hearing people talk about their bird experiences because it's been such a big part. Since I was 10 years old, I was a bird watcher, and I got my brother Peter interested when he was probably 5 or 6. And it's been our family hobby for 65 years all over the world, and it's just so much fun to have. And once people know you're the bird man, I was the bird man on McCormick. When I started at McCormick, my first trip was to Africa on a business trip. I'm in Kenya, all these birds in Kenya. And my boss realizes I'm a bird watcher, and he says to me, he says, Hank, don't let anybody here know that you're a bird watcher. Don't let them know that that's your hobby. You won't get a promotion. You'll be, there was the idea, not to make a stereotype, of a old lady bird watcher in tennis shoes and binoculars. I mean, that was what the bird, it wasn't a young college graduate spice buyer that I was. But it was really difficult. But it's just so fun. And being the bird man now of Thompson's Point in Charlotte, where we spend the summer, people come up every party, somebody's got a bird question or bird observation. It's so wonderful that people are reaching out and having that kind of experience in what has been so important to me. Yes?
Is the Ecuadorian government supportive of the ecotourism or not?
Very much so, especially in the Galapagos. They get, I think, 100,000 people in the Galapagos. The problem out there is it's getting too big. They're starting to build hotels now. There's a lot of economic pressure on the government. Another big problem is the oil. There are large tracts of the Amazon that have been protected, but that they have a lot of oil. And the president of Ecuador came to, I guess, international conservation groups or World Bank or something years ago and says, if you give me this much money, I will protect this area forever. And the world didn't come up with that money, so now they're starting to put roads in the Amazon, and a lot of these areas will be developed because money always talks. Money always talks. That's why ecotourism is so important, because it gives an economic incentive for the locals to protect the forest and to feed the hummingbirds. Anybody else?
So
Yeah, John. Yeah, I'm sorry.
You did mention that one species migrated to New England.
Yeah, the ruby-throated hummingbird is the only hummingbird that we have here, and it winters in Mexico and Central America. It flies 500 miles across the Gulf of Mexico.
It's a hummingbird.
And it's beating its wings, 60 times a second. And it takes, I think, 2 days to get across the Gulf of Mexico, 500 miles. So how many times is it beating its wings? I don't have a calculator. It has that many zeros. But,
You said there was a thrush upon the thrush.
I'm sorry?
The thrush.
Oh, the thrush, yeah. The great-cheeked thrush, when I was a bird watcher years ago, there was one species called the great-cheeked thrush, which is that bird that winters in Ecuador. It's been only in the last 15 years or so that scientists have realized that the one that's on the mountaintops in New England, including Mansfield, is actually a different species. It has a different song, and the DNA is slightly different, so they called that the Bicknell's thrush. So we have the Bicknell's thrush. 30 years ago, we would have said, no, that's the great-cheeked thrush that's up there. But now we have the Bicknell's thrush, and the great-cheek is further north in northeastern Canada, but very, very similar, almost impossible to tell apart visually, but if you see it on top of Mount Mansfield, it's going to be the Bicknell's thrush now rather than the great-cheek. The Bicknell's thrush all winter on, well, they thought on Hispaniola Island, either Haiti or Dominican Republic. They're finding now some in Cuba. They're making the Vermont Nature Bins, I guess it is, or one of the ecological groups in Vermont, has a project down there to find out how many of these Bicknell thrushes are wintering in Cuba and maybe even Puerto Rico. But that's where most of them winter. The great-cheek thrush goes all the way to Ecuador. Anybody else? Yeah.
Migration is probably another whole topic.
It's a wonderful topic. And my favorite migration story, and I'll end on this one, is because I've got Keith Woodley, who's my friend from New Zealand, who is the manager of a place called Miranda, where these shorebirds that breed in Alaska winter. And then they go back up the coast of China and they get back to Alaska. That they knew. Until a number of years ago, and Keith can correct me, but in the last 10 or 12 years, 15 years, right, Keith, they found out that the birds, these shorebirds that winter in his refuge there in the North Island of New Zealand, that breed in Alaska, take off from Alaska and fly nonstop, 7,000 miles, 8 days, nonstop, and arrive in New Zealand. It's one of the it's the longest nonstop bird migration, certainly in the world. But migration, and then watch these monarch butterflies, guys. Have you seen them this year? More than normal. They're on their way to Mexico. They're on their way to Mexico. Bup, 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 bup. They're on their way to Mexico. Incredible. At any rate, on that note, thank you all for coming.